Hello, everyone. While discussing different topics about the global issues, we usually say that education is really important. And education is contributing to the way how we understand global issues and how we cope with them. And also, education helps us both on the individual level and also on the public level to increase our capacity to live better and to to meet actually challenges. So, but how exactly education is influencing the way we live? What is connections with the democratic development, and how education indeed is influencing our society and our economy? And overall, how education is pushing the civilizational development in our world. So let's jump into the education and see a little bit how we can make our life better with education. Yeah, so we probably touch the issues of the education in theory, and we will talk a little bit more about the education as a political issue and mainly about the impact of education on political life. And also we will see how it reflects different parts of our society, and we'll talk a little bit about the idea of the global education and about the international exchanges and mobility and how they influence the understanding of the educational process in the modern world. And if you see the David Baker TED Fulbright video, that is indeed really interesting because he touched the one of the very important problems that we put in the way of the thinking about the education. I really don't like him making a little bit jokes from the Sir Robinson's ideas about the change of the way we do education right now. Nevertheless, David Baker is stressing on the three important, to my mind, questions. First one is about the institutionalized education, and can this education prepare us for the future? And how it's doing that. Then can institutionalized education, the way that we have it right now, help us to combat social and economic threats and actually making our life better? And can institutionalized education help us to combat totalitarian regimes and promote democracy? Have education that is put it into these standards of the preschool education, school education, and higher education is actually doing their job better? He considers yes, and please see video to understand more facts about that. Nevertheless, these three important issues are bringing us to the idea: is education as a system is helping us in terms of the social development? And what is important here, it's actually to see that definitely education is doing that and having a number of benefits comparing to the non-educational society. And nevertheless, despite the education is really old process that is probably supporting the development of the human civilization, nevertheless, the developments in the educational sphere is happening only right now. What we can state right now in general, that definitely in the last 200 or 100 even year, we increasingly improve the level of the education globally. So literacy is increasing, enrollment rates to the basic education is increasing. More and more kids can go to kindergartens, can go to school, and actually the number of the schooling year is increasing. That means that we are not simply getting the primary education, but also going to universities or, for example, for our PhD studies. However, despite these basic improvements that could probably be seen in any country, these all good trends are starting to happen only since the mid of the 20th century. And we don't see and don't understand how these effects will actually cause the change in the future. Because some of the really good trends are now transforming into some of the negative effects. We also see the disproportion of education of educational levels in the different countries. So while the majority of countries are becoming better and better educated, nevertheless there are still countries that face tremendous problems with the access, even the access to education. The quality education is also one of the important issues, because these good trends of getting better education that can lead you to the better job are not working to the major extent anymore. And we do have the inequality issue and discrimination in the education, both gender, age, formal and informal education, and this is what we want to talk a little bit about. So naturally, if you think about the education, we take the measurement system. We actually take the two measurement systems. The first one, what is the average number of years that is spent by person for getting the educational level? The more years spent for education, that means the higher degree the person will receive, and the probability of such spending is one of the important factors. The other is literacy. And the literacy, by literacy, it's usually used as the key measure of the population's education. And by literacy, we mainly understand the ability to read, to count, and to write like short sample of the text about one's I don't know, biography or some matter. And we see both factors that are present in the measurement systems. And what about literacy? That you can see the difference, that in 1820s, only 12% of the world population could read and write. And now only 16% of the world population remained illiterate. And this is tremendous change in the overall social process of the education. So you can see actually that before the 1950s, that was a part when after the Second World War, the process of education for all like starting to be more and more widespread. However, even here, there are a lot of debates, and basically one of the biggest debates before the 1950s is, should education be like a possibility for all of people? It is deeply connected with the process of the economic development that we'll touch in a few minutes. And in general, you can see if we see on the global scale of the literacy rate in 2015, the majority of countries, they have really good signs. So the majority of countries, they have the literacy rate that is more than 90, let's say, percent. However, you can see a few dots here, mainly in Asia, and in the South Asia, and also in the Sub-Saharan region, that is showing that the number of illiterate population is still pretty high in our times. However, if we, for example, compare with the beginning of the 90s, we can see that that education is definitely the long process, but in the perspective of one generation, you can do a lot. So please even compare like the colors. You can see the Asia, for example, China, and the Latin Caribbean world. Yeah, so you can see the difference that is coming almost in one generation. So this is direct impact of the good policy making that they can change the situation. What is also important here, if we see the education globally, that at the time when we see that the majority of the youngers are getting better and better education, and the literacy rate among youngers is growing, there is definitely a good sign. In terms of the elders, there are still challenges, and once more the same regions. So you can see that it's even bigger than general the literacy level. So the majority of Africa and also the eastern countries and the South Asia, they face the tremendous trouble in terms of the illiterate aged population, and there is a big challenge for them how to incorporate them into the social development. Nevertheless, we still have a number of countries that, as I said, they face this challenge of the illiterate population because of the different reasons, mainly for the conflict reasons, mainly for the improper public investment, or because of the limited access to the territories that the normal educational process could be done. However, you can see that literacy rate, for example, in Niger or Guinea or South Sudan, Mali. So this is a top of the worst countries in terms of the literacy. And can you imagine that, like 30%, only 30% of the country could be literate and have this literacy, and it's definitely challenging the development process in them. However, this is not the big list. Yes, so in the majority of cases, we are witnessing these situations, a situation in the sub-Saharan Africa, and while the rest of the world is performing much more better. And if we see, like by the economical background, you can see the same stories. So the majority of the world do have the literate population. However, this is a challenge for the low-income countries and sub-Saharan countries that unfortunately not people have the full access to education, or even, we will see it later, even if we have the access to education, sometimes the quality of this education is not so good. However, the majority of the developed states, and I just compare a few, like Central Europe, Baltics, Ukraine, you can see United States, that they have almost 100%, so more than 95% of the literate population. However, once more, the idea of education is not new, and we definitely know with you the benefits of education, because you're actually attending university, so probably you know the benefits of education. But the question of the compulsory education that is paid from taxes that we paid for a state is not so old. It's actually the product of Enlightenment and Industrial Revolution, and it's the systemic product. What I mean, before the Industrial Revolution, there were no system at all. Besides, for example, Jesuit colleges, and you can attend them if you were extremely rich or from the noble family, and this idea of Jesuit colleges that mainly have done the educational process and the educational development. Nevertheless, not all of people have access to that. Or, for example, professional or vocational education, vocational education, if you were trained like in the Middle Ages or later by some of the masters to produce something new. However, the idea of the compulsory education was actually deeply connected with the industrialization and economic development of the countries. So, and it mainly showed the three, let's say, pillars of the educational approach. First pillar was to study basics or to study classics. So through the industrial revolution times of the 18th, 19th century, basically, knowing classics was one of the pillar. Then have and train the deductive reasoning, and then practical applications of your skills to the concrete and practical job. What was needed because industrial revolution ought to be done by somebody. That means that they simply the process of manufacturing requires good skilled workers to work more and produce more. And the simple solution was in the vocational education. So improvements in literacy, they to some extent preceded the industrial revolution, because the good innovations were simply done by more educated people. And on the other hand, the rise of the living standards due to this revolution affected in the better education. So we can see the clear correlation between these two ideas. And both the development of new technologies, making new innovations, and their use in production relied on a much better educated population. So we can see this both sides effect. Industrialization and economic development requires professional workers and high developed skills, and they, on the contrary, made the innovation and industrial revolution possible. So, and this process is happening right now. So we see this principle that is working. That is why the majority of the countries, I mean, of the developed world, they simply used that idea of producing more skilled labor as a main factor of taking responsibility for granting the education level for everyone. That is why today it is, to some extent, one of the social standards, the idea of the compulsory education. And everybody, including you and me, are paying for that. We can see from this chart actually how education was, how people were enrolled into the education of the different levels, and we can see that definitely not all countries were doing the same way. But nevertheless, you can see how, starting from the times of the Industrial Revolution, from the end of the 19th century, and basically from the 20th century, we were doing like the shift to the better access to the better conditions. Definitely, the developed countries have made this pass really fast, and they reached the top very fast, while nevertheless we still are witnessing the troubles with sub-Saharan region, with Middle East and North Africa, yes, and with the East and southeast of Asia. Yeah. Okay. And to understand actually the structure of the education and its connectivity to the economy, you can simply see the natural classes. So students were taught through the school years and later university years the same way as they were required to work at the manufacturers. That is why you can see the major similarities in that. And the main purpose of the academia, of the schooling, was to both to increase the academic ability or the intelligence of the students, and also to increase skills, let's say the economic capacity. Yes. However, that caused the one of the problems that not all of people actually will become academics or scientists. Not because they're not smart, but actually universities and schools made this line of people that are smart and not smart. If you are not studying good, it simply is understood that you're not smart in that way. However, that is not true. Nevertheless, due to results, this is one of the critical situations. And the other critical situation, even if you have some level of the economic capacity, that doesn't mean that you will win in this running. So not all of people will benefit economically, and not all of the societies will benefit economically for having the better results. So that is why actually in the nowadays there is a big issue and the big question. So what the education should be, and especially with the influence of the technologies. And here I reflect to the Sir Robinson ideas that I do recommend you to read this book of the Creative Schools, or in Ukrainian language it is translated into the future of the school. So fantastic book, not only about education, but about the education for you, for personal purpose. And he started his book and his idea was a very popular thesis, is that every country at the moment is reforming public education, and it is true. But the other part of this thesis is that they are doing it for ages. So there is no country that stops in terms of the reforming the public system of the education. And then he mentioned the two reasons for this reforming. The first one is economic. And here lies the question, so how should we educate children to ensure our economic development? Yes, and to ensure the win in the global competency, especially take into account that we can't predict and we can't foresee what will be with the economy by the end of the next week. So how we can do prognosis in what we should teach to run economy, while we don't know what will be in the years ahead, or even months or weeks ahead. And the other reason for reforming actually is the culturalism. So how should we educate children to give them some sense of the cultural identity of our nation, and to share the tradition, to share this national codes, especially in the times of globalization, but it's not needed to stay in your country right now, and you can actually work or produce in any environment that you have. And here, with the educational tendency to shape our cultural identity, we also need to structure it and to keep this flow of the tradition. So how this penetrate each other, and how we should educate people, especially take into account that sometimes cultural traditions are different, and sometimes it is really hard to come to the common sense of the some values or some understandings of our history, especially in terms of the history. Yes, so this is a balancing that is still important to be answered. And how to and his other idea was how to explain that, take into account these economic factors and cultural factors, the old style principles: if you hard work, you will do well, and if you have a good college, you'll have a good job, is not working in the major sense anymore. Because we have a number of cases when people without the professional or without the full cycle of the education were performing economically much better than people who have done these steps. That doesn't mean, once more, I'm not judging here by the smartness of people, this is something else. But here he actually take this idea of institutionalized education. So the system of education that is working, is it working greatly? And here I do recommend you to see his fantastic TED video, Do School Skills Creativity. If you haven't seen it before, so my congratulations. I'm a little bit jealous for you, because you will spend fantastic 20 minutes of your life like understanding how the education shapes our lives and in general the social development. In his video, he is putting this question. So how we can be sure with the state system that we are doing it properly? Because since in the process of the industrialization, so there is tremendous changes in the world economy and in the world society, and we do not need right now more this well-skillful workers for the manufacturing work. We even put in some robots and do the robotization of the processes, and that simply means that we need people with some other qualities that could create, that could produce something new, and but we are using the same actually approaches that we were using in the 19th century. Well, it is important because on the other sense, if we refuse from the education, we can see that we'll simply come to this gap of the not educated countries that are not performing greatly. And we definitely see the strong correlations and even causation between quality of education and the GDP development per capita or in general in every country. So how can we establish these systems to work properly, and how we can meet these needs is one of the important questions of the nowadays education. And by here, we come to the idea that education is not only an economical feature, yes, and it's not only the production, and it's not only culture, but it's also a political science issue, and it's also the question for the policy making, how we can make this system work. And even more, how we can use education to prepare the better policy makers, and do education actually affects democratic development and affects the social development in the political sphere. So let's take a chance and see some of the ideas how to answer these questions. The first one, we should definitely understand while there is a clear correlation between the economic growth and the education level. Nevertheless, yes, indeed, this system presented by Sir Robinson, that good college means good job, is not working anymore. In some cases it is, in some not. And here you can see a chart that is showing actually the starting and the ending level and the correlations between the education and between the employability. And you can see, while, for example, for elders, we can see the clear dependency that the better educations and the longer educations people have, the better job percentage enrollment that they actually have. However, with the new generations of the 25 plus people, we can see that there are the number of groups that is not working in that sense. So if you get better education or longer spend your time in educating yourself, that doesn't mean that you will get a job. In some countries, it is still, but in the many of countries, it's not. And this is one of the questions why it is happening. And probably the answer is that education is not only the process you are spending in the institutionalized way. So the informal education, the education of yourself in general, understanding, reading, seeing everything else that is out of your classes is also improving your skills. So you should not only treat education as sitting in a class and trying to get some facts and make a correlation between these facts. So what is the impact of education overall on the social life? And let's start from the political process. So first of all, it's skill and knowledge provider. Yes, we use education to be more skillful, to have more knowledge about the political process. That means that we have a chance to elect better people or to be prepared to be elected. The second is actually socialization of person into the national political culture, because through educational process, we are showing what are the good or bads of our societies, and actually what is the culture of our society, how to behave in that. And this simply means that in Ukraine, for example, or in the United States, you'll be educated concerning your the issues of your country, of the political culture of your country in one way, and in Malaysia or in Indonesia, it will be something different because they have different transition. So this is important socialization factor. Then training political elites, I think it's clear, mobilizing electorate. So in different classes, especially in the political science classes, the idea of participation and the necessity of the participation is what political scientists love to talk for ages. And that means that they inspire younger generations to take part in the political life, to vote, to be elected, yes, to participate in other sense. So the idea of John Stuart Mill, let's everybody participate. And then the preservation of elite power, like in the cultural Marxism, yes, to some extent that is true, because political elites, they are capable to organize and regulate educations, do the changes to educations. That means to some extent they are trying to keep the flow. They keep this reasoning of preservation, the rules of the political rules as they are. And if somebody is interested in a change, yes, it is possible. But if somebody is interested to have like the ideas that were working for ages to be present in schools or universities, they simply have a power for that in terms of laws and regulations, how the education should be. Do education has an impact on democracy? One of the questions that C. Robinson put it. Most theories of the political science, and especially the theory of the institutionalism, yes, they state yes for sure directly. And indeed, we can stipulate that a country's level of education attainment is one of the key determinants of this emergence of the sustainability of democratic political institutions. So that simply means that education promotes political participation at the individual level, and it also fosters a collective sense of the civic duty. So once more, the Stuart Mill participation. And education can also increase civic skills and cognitive abilities. And that simply means that it can increase political efficacy and the ambition to run for the office. That means that the more skillful you consider yourself to be, the more probability it is that you will run in the in some of the campaigns, and people will trust you. They want you, and sometimes they want you to run. And there was a number of researches, and by this content research showed the clear correlation between the skills and cognitive abilities to recognize the necessity of you to take the responsibility for your life and for life of your neighbors. What is also important here is that educational levels in a country correlate positively with their measures of democratization in the subsequent years. So here is important to state that the more educated society is, the less possibility of the authoritarian regimes, or for example, populistic regimes are to come. And it's mainly because of the ability to take long-term decision-making and to make a better prognosis. So if educational level, higher educational level, and qualitative actual educational level help you to gain it, the good sense of prognosis. That simply means that you will not be interested too much into the short-term decision-making that usually connected with the populism. And usually it is considered that the individuals with a higher education participate in political activities more than individuals with less education. However, it's not clear dependency, and in the research of a person that I will quote here, and you can read it, is stating that. So in general, it do, but the big difference between the higher education and the basic, let's say, school education, there is no big difference, and we don't see dependency there. And this is a dangerous factor because it contradicts the idea that people with lower education can do like this long-term decision making in general sense. And overall, there is a causal link between education and democratization that we can observe, and that is why in the political theory we can see, yes, that education is bringing more democracy. So we can see in this chart, actually, I took a few countries so to see the difference from different regions besides the Australia, yes, but we can see the clear correlation between education in the past and the democracy today. So the more school years the person gain in the country, yes, in average, that means that the more democratic regime you receive. So it's not working as a causation, but nevertheless we can see the clear correlation because most the like authoritarian regime, like we can see in China or Kuwait or Iran or Afghanistan or, for example, Niger. So that is really connected with the number of people's parents for schooling. Well, for example, in the United States or I don't know, in any democratic country, you can see that in average, people are spending more times on the in the education. So there is clear correlation, not causation, but correlation of this fact. What is more interesting here, that there was a very good research of this group, and they were trying to find out what is the probability of the person running for office and get elected by the education. And they take the case of Sweden for the 30 years research, and they see that actually after you gain MA degree, the probability of both being nominated and probability of being elected, it's decreasing. So you should not be too smart like to go to the political process. But we can see the different reasoning of that, probably some of the ideas, the time spent and for educating you. Nevertheless, you can see this up to 17 years of the educational process. That means the school years plus university bachelor and masters, people are not interested to go and play for the electoral games. But what is interesting here, you can see the dependency between the probability of nomination here especially and the probability of re-election. So you see how it difference, probably 4 times difference, at least in case of Sweden. I don't saw these researches in the worldwide temperature, but I think there could be some on the for the country. So if you are interested, you can take this interesting topic and to try to investigate and to see how your country behaves here. Education and health. It is quite clear that education is bringing democracy and more political participation, but what is in terms of health? Also in social sciences, it is considered that the better education, the better health you can receive. So the people with lower income often live in the communities that have different challenges to health, and there is dependency in between the education and income that cause to the this level of conditions. So you can see that these communities, they have less access to the normal food or normal education, to the good quality schools, well-paid jobs, and so on and so forth, and they definitely affect their health standards. And here, there was also a good research in United States by the Center of Society and Health Education. And in this research, they discovered that this investment into education leads to more illness and higher medical care costs that offset the intended savings of this same budget cuts. So that simply means that later, if the state is not investing into education, they will pay even more for the healthcare. And there's a good correlation between these two factors. So if policymakers would like to save, no, this is not possible for them to do. And definitely we can see that in the number of cases, the better education you have, the better you understand the life, the better possibilities you have to keep yourself healthy and safe. In 2011, the prevalence of diabetes in the United States was 15% for adults who did not complete the higher schools and don't know how to behave with regarding to their personal health care. And also adults who don't finish high schools in the United States are living 9 years less than college educated counterparts. That is why we can see these connections. Also interesting research that indeed was trying to investigate the relationship between the education and health literacy in Ireland. And what they found, yes, indeed they found that this relationship, this correlation do exist. So the more you are moving to the higher education, to the final stage of the tertiary education, that means the preschool, school education, and the higher education, the more literate about your health and your behavior you become. However, it's interesting to see that here, when the second level of the secondary school, the results are dropping, so they are falling, and it's interesting to see why they are falling here. Because probably of the number of people who decided not to continue education, yes. And here school was somehow trying to make them know how to behave with the health, and then they don't see the effect, the punishment from the institutions to do that. What also is important that education, especially for the developing countries, for this Asian and African countries, that education help to avoid child mortality. And here you can see on this chart that the child mortality and mean years of schooling. You can see the more school years are spent, the less child mortality is. And here in the Niger, for example, in the Ghana, comparing with the 1950s to 2010, you can see that they don't have dramatical fall. But overall, if you see the general flow, yeah, we can state that education is helping to avoid child mortality, and by this simply the increase of the increase of the the increase of the population overall. So yeah. What about economy? Education is a part of the human capital, and we definitely understand that it generates positive spillover for everyone. Once more, in the social sciences, there is a strong belief that the better education, the better jobs possibilities you will have. And indeed, education improve a country's ability by this to innovate, as well to adapt a country into the new technologies and to to do the technological progress. Without educated people, it would be impossible. But also, what is interesting here that that increases in the number of universities across of the country are positively associated with the growth of the GDP per capita. So the more educational institutions is, the better economic behavior you'll probably have, both because of educated people, skills, and also sciences. And the better education does not only lead to the higher individual income, but also is a necessary, although not always sufficient, precondition for the long-term economic growth. It's not only affecting your personal life, but also the life of the country. So that simply means that you should study well to make the economic growth of your country. And it could be surely seen that actually how the countries are spending the expenditures for different types of education. If you look here, there is a top of the developed countries. So it's not of the top, it's just selection of the developed countries. And here, the countries with the low income. And you can see that in the high income countries, usually the households have larger share of education expenditures at the level of the higher education more and as the lower levels. Yes, so you can see this orange dots. That means that they have this basic education as granted. Yeah, but for example, here in the low income countries are spending a lot on the basis, and there is simply no cost for the higher education. That is definitely a problem. So there's why a lot of international donors and organizations spend like to support a little bit, because in the public sphere they don't have too much money to do this overall. In general, if you take the expenditures for the education, but not for the university education, but for the primary and secondary schools, you can see that in the majority of the OECD countries, at least, this is public expenditure of the education. Once more, it's clear since the industrialized times, education was considered and is considered to be the state responsibility. While the private expenditures on education, they still exist, but you can see that they haven't grown too much since at least this 10 years frame. What is interesting that if we compare the dependencies with the percentage of the GDP growth to understand how exactly it reflects economy, you can see that, for example, in the majority of cases, countries are recommended, at least by the UNESCO, to invest at least 6% of the GDP growth. But you can see that there is the majority of countries are near like 5%, and it doesn't reflect how much they spend on the years. On average, how people spend. So that doesn't mean that you will put a lot of money and people will be actually studying more. Yes. Every country has their own situation, and you can see here on this chart that there is no clear dependency here. What we have in terms of the educational expenditures, also with the PISA score. So the PISA score is the general test. Yes, that is done by the graduates of the secondary school, and it's about mathematics, about reading, and about writing. And once more, if you're spending more here for the education, there is also no clear dependency that you will get the better results. And overall, the only thing that is influencing on this PISA scores, like of getting more skilled people to have more results, is actually the year of schooling. So the more year of schooling are, the better results you will have. So not money invested, but overall system that is working at the connected system. But here, I just want to reflect on the data that also, according to the research that is mentioned here in the overall data topic about the education. So there are a few attempts to understand does the education and the better level of education affects your salaries. And in general, yes, that we can clearly state. You can see here that the more years you spend for education, it means in general, the better job you will receive. But there is no clear correlation anymore, as I stated. But both for women and for men, usually, in general, we can see such dependency. And it also influenced the overall economic system. There was a good research on that was also trying to investigate the PISA test results. And actually what they see in their research, they were doing it for more than 40 years, then one, it's not score, it should be point of, in the list of the PISA test of countries, at least of the OECD countries, they brought 2% of the GDP per capita growth. So the more students perform, the better results in the GDP per capita growth the country will help. There is no, for example, difference that Singapore or Taiwan or Korea, they have like the better results here. That simply mean that indeed we can see that correlation between the better quality of education and actually the results. So that is why you should study really great to achieve the good economy. If you failed your test, that simply means then in future generation, your economic growth will not be big. So these are some of the dependencies that we have, and what are the problems in education that actually occurred in nowadays lives. So there are a number of them, and the major of them are connected with the inequality issues. So we observe still that there is a social inequality in the access to education. There is age discrimination. There is also the gender inequality in terms of access, especially in the traditional countries. Overall, the quality of education is an issue, and the issues of multiculturalism and nationalism. So the reflection of more broader education and more traditional national-based education. So what the platform should be done, it's still a number of discussions are going here. So the quality of education, as I told, the education right now is considered to be a social good, and even in basic right, and clearly stated in the Declaration of the Human Rights that this is a basic right for any social being. But it's also, as we see, is a cornerstone for broader social and economic development. But unfortunately, despite the large improvements that we indeed see in the last years, there is a continuous reduction of education inequalities, and also the continuous reduction of these inequalities. There are still some challenges that we meet. First of all, the poorest countries in the world have very large part of the population who are illiterate, as we see. For example, in Niger, we can see that the literacy rate is extremely low, so it's only about 36.5%. So the access and the possibilities of the poor country to actually to have the good education and impact by this education on the social, economical, and political growth. Also, the quality of education. Half of the 150 million of children who cannot read, write, or do mathematics on the basic level, they still go to school. So not all of the schools in the world, according to the UNESCO research, are performing great. So the quality of this education is still important. So price of education in the developed countries. Well, this is an obligation. Nevertheless, for example, the higher education in a number of countries, so people are paying for that. And in some of the countries, especially, for example, in the United States, you probably heard that the scandals that were happening, and because the prices are too high, and nearly 17% of the US population can't go to college because they just can't afford it. And most educational systems do not yet spend 6% of the recommended GDP on education. That's what we have seen. However, despite this is not the most influential factor, nevertheless, if even the system and policies are designed good, but without adequate level of funding, even the best design interventions and decisions won't work. Still, this is very consuming part of the of the people life, and state should invest into that. So in general, if you see, but this is a world, so this is how the access to education is limited. So there is a number of people who actually dropped off for different reasons out of the schools. And what is a good tendency that for primary school, male and female, the number of people who are not getting education is decreasing dramatically. However, for example, for the upper education, for the university, for the college life, you can see that the decrease, there is decrease in numbers here, but actually it is not decrease here. So this is one of the also challenges how to do this. In general, globally, you can also see that different countries, as we told, perform in different ways. And mostly, if you see the general trajectory, you can see that mostly of the developed countries, usually people are spending more in the educational cycle comparing to the underdeveloped countries. Yeah, and if you compare the literacy rate with the average years of schooling, you can see right now the full dependency. So the more you spend, the more literacy you have. So despite the need to reinvest or to recreate the good conditions for the institutionalized education that was actually developed in the 19th century, nevertheless, it's quite important to state that this institutionalized, standardized education indeed bring literacy to people, and you can see that in the majority of cases, the more years they spend, the more literacy they have. Despite some cases with, for example, with Niger, there is a conflict situation here. Sudan, that it was decreasing. Yeah. And overall, the share with no formal education that still exists, still a problem, but it's also decreasing a little bit. So while here the developed states, plus Ukraine, put it here, they have practically a low level of people outside of the education. But for example, for the African countries, you can see that there is high percent of people who never get access to that. And in general, if you compare different regions, I just put a few of them, you can see that we have also this age disproportion, but overall, in Sub-Saharan Africa, South Asia, you can see the conditions are pretty the same. Well, for example, equality in getting to the education in advanced economies, or South America and Europe will have the same as advanced economies. They have pretty low level of the inequalities. It simply means that people can get access to that despite even the number of years that they live in their life. So gender. Gender is also a factor, and unfortunately is also a factor for inequality. And while world is moving in terms of the gender equality in education overall, so and women are more educated today than in any other point in the history, nevertheless, there is still some countries and societies that face this problem. But overall, in 1960s, adult women had an average 2.6 years of education, and nowadays it's almost tripled to the 7.7 years in general over the world to education. However, women are still not as educated as men. And in 1960s, overall, the median gender gap was 0.8%, 0.8, that means almost 80% of the women have done the same as a man, have not done, yes. Now we have the difference like in terms of the 30% in 2010 at least, but it still exists and it's still important. So, and here, especially, we should take into account these conditions of the developing states, because the majority of problems are happening there. And gender gaps very rarely persist in the educated countries that try to perform much more better in this way. So in general, you can see that in terms of the female schooling, all the countries have made the tremendous improvements. However, in some of the countries, let's compare it here, the United Arab Emirates and Senegal, it was not so high. So, and if we take by region, I just put here the sub-Saharan region, like to show the difference comparing to the world average. So you can see that unfortunately there were, despite for them this is a big improvement, but comparing to the world, this is not the big improvement, and these countries should be very treated accurately in terms of the education. And once more, general observation, yes, that in the developing countries, especially South Asia, Sub-Saharan Africa, we do see these gender gaps that still exist. Yeah, and one of the important points here is actually, this is a reason for that. If we have more female children that are not getting to the primary education, that simply means that they will not continue their education. So the steps of ensuring them the possibility to be in the primary education is increasingly important. But here with Africa and here with some states of Asia, you can see how the traditional societies is not only because of the money, but also of the traditional societies that are cutting the possibility of women to be educated properly. So quality of education is also an important part, and once more, education helps people to be more productive and to get better paid jobs. And it definitely has its spillover effects. We talk a little bit about that, about the child morality, also in the democratization, that means the fight with corruption, so on and so forth. But what we see in the quality of education in these all visualizations, that if we want to increase education, it's not just enough to send kids to school. It definitely influences their literacy, but to have these chances of getting better life, that means that the person should have quality of education enough to get necessary skills to that could be applied. And here I just want to return to the skill issue in terms of the quality of education, and we can see that there is overworld like the PISA ranking, and this is based on the PISA test that actually counts the scores of math, of the science, and of the readings. And by this we can see that the better countries who performed in all, it's like China, Singapore, like Macau, Hong Kong. Okay, the territory is disputable. Then Hong Kong, Estonia, Japan, South Korea, Canada, Taiwan, Finland. Yes, the top 10 countries. Well, here, like the best results from what was tested, you can see like the countries that still are not so they are not low income, they probably are low and middle income. So, and what is this PISA testing is important because it is one of the measurements how we can understand that the society, the education in terms of results, yes, in terms of formatting the skills is going better. And here it is one of the measurements that influence the overall competence of the countries. So here the global competence index that was done by the World Economic Forum in 2019, and you can see the list of the countries that actually win this gaming, and in the major of cases, while education is only a part of that, but in the general you can see the same countries. So Singapore, United States, like Netherlands, Japan, Sweden, Finland, yes. So that simply means that education is very closely correlating with the overall skill competencies of our nations. While, for example, the lowest performing countries, the same story with the education that we have overall. So yeah, and here you can see if we see this list once more. So the countries with the skills, yes. So here education lies, yes. So South Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa, even if they have like to some extent better performances in the other indicators, nevertheless it's so dependent with the infrastructure, with the markets, with the ecosystem of the country, with the policy making of the country, that you can hardly see the country that had bad results in education but being competent comparing to the other states. So it's definitely one part of the game. And what is important here is it's once more about the quality. So the quality of education is increasingly important factor. And you can see on this chart actually the number of the different countries that they have share of students achieving the advanced results and the minimum results. And here closer, the majority of countries you can see here. This is a problem because the mostly developed countries of South Korea, and here Singapore will be there, here the United States will be there. They have the larger proportion of the students who are doing much more better in their studies than just getting the minimum. Yeah, and it's definitely reflects the GDP per capita. We can see this dependency. So the more scores, the more well-trained, the more skills people receive, the more competent they are, the more able they are to make the economy and their life running better. So you can see these clear correlations, especially pay attention on the Singapore, on the South Korea, how they change dramatically comparing, for example, with Ukraine or with Argentina. I think it's not per capita, it's like the general. Yeah, this is per capita. And for example, with Syria or Niger, that almost stood on the same position. So education here is important. The quality of education is important to influence the overall situation. So and here lies actually the environment for policy making. Yes, how we sustain, how we make these systems working to do a better education. And overall, we can state that everything, like the institutions, ideologies, interests, everything that we can have, they influence the type that we are running. And in general, if we see the state systems, we can very easily state that they are either centralized or decentralized. There is not good or bad in any of the cases. This is a type of society that could be. So while trying to think over the education, work with this topic, you should pay attention on these issues. And we can see that there are a number of centralized states when the full control for education and for the expenditures and for testing, for example, are done by the central governmental level, and France, Germany, or China are such type of the countries. Well, for example, there are a number of countries that they don't have the centralized educational bodies, but every state, if it is the federal state, country, or municipality, is pushing the agenda on their level. And Finland, United States, Japan, or United Kingdom is a wonderful example of that. There are also mixed countries when they have both, like the centralized on, for example, on the university level. Ukraine is a good example for that, and decentralized system on the municipal level, so the secondary education in that. Once more, nothing good or bad, it's just the type how you are doing that. And you can see on this chart, yes, that the funding is going from the different levels, the control is going on the different levels, and also the testing is also done on the different levels. And mostly centralized countries are doing that on the national level, while for example, for the Finland, you can see that this rather decentralized, so the local governments are taking care of the education and they are financing that. However, the overall control is done by the national state. And if you see the expenditures that has the influence of the how you spend for the education, and if you see the expenditures of the education, you can see that the public expenditures are present more. So once more, this is a state obligation, and states are spending to there, and the cost for the private education still exists, still present, but not so big, not so large. The second part of the story is political regimes that also influence the system of the education. And here we can see at least the democratic regime, and the majority of countries are there, but also some dictatorship education type. When there are the common features of such education system includes the monopoly of the state control of education, physical and military training that are incorporated into the educational process, and also the indoctrination of the schooling. And for example, in Cuba or China especially, we have this doctrine and ideology that is present in the education, in any educational level. But also we can see the nationalistic educational systems that they have strong influence on traditions. In educational process, it's even happening in the developed countries like Singapore, Malaysia, but it also happened with the traditional societies, and in some cases, for example, for the religious communities, if they have really religious-based education, so that they have so strong influence of the traditions. Nothing good or bad here, so I think that everywhere here should be some pros and contrasts. Even in the dictatorship regime, usually they're trying to establish the full education for everybody, but this is really controlled kind of education. Yeah, and there is by having these different types and different systems, it is this contradiction sometimes between the systems and the types occur. And this definitely harmed the idea of the inter and multicultural exchanges, and it cut in a little bit the possibility of the let's say uniting over the global challenges that every country meets. That is why the idea of the global education was created, and it's to some extent very neoliberal approach of how we do the education. So the major idea is to limit these stereotypes and to limit these differences between the educational system of the different countries, and to push the agenda towards the global challenges that is actually happening in different countries. So, and to formulate so-called the global competencies. And these global competencies are considered to be the overall the development of the education, the human rights education, the education for sustainability, education for peace and conflict prevention, intercultural communication, intercultural education, and education for the global citizenship. In some kind of the approach, actually, discourse of the global issues is one of the example of this global education, while we're trying to focus on the issues and problems that are happening in different societies. So we're not only national concentrated in this field. So you can consider like courses like this to be some kind of this global education. And I should reflect that many international institutions using these neoliberal approaches are trying to do this in different countries. So they mainly take in the human rights perspective, ecological perspective, development and sustainability perspective, yes, and this globalized perspective, and make the connectivity of different nations that are working together, trying to elaborate with the common issues on the global scale, and see how they reflect the national communities. There are a number of centers that were built, and even some of the international agreements were based on this field of the internationalized and global education. One of which is European Council Global Educational Charter, that was called to develop the collaboration of the institutions from European Union with the institutions from all over the world towards the global education. And the North-South Center of the European Council is a good example for that, performing a number of different researches, performing a number of different conferences, models of European Union, of United Nations, or whatever, that is happening in the world, and also some online and informal education. So if you're interested in this topic of the globalized education, please come here. And in general, it reflects the Sustainable Development Goals that I talked previously, yes, and quality of education and access to educations overall, despite of the community or the situation target for everyone. So once more, if every country has their own targets, what they should receive, and the majority of the investments are spent to help these developing countries to cope with this situation. But actually, every country has met some challenges, and only the developed countries, they have very high standards of the quality education that should be kept. And you can see here, it's the access to education, like avoidance of these gender gaps or age gaps, also to the access to the education with the people with special needs, infrastructure projects. So every country put their own targets, quantitative targets that they want to meet in terms of sustaining the quality education. And using this neoliberal approach of the globalized education, a part of it that is a separate part. It's not the outcome, but this is a little bit a separate part. It's actually the international mobility that you all like. So this neoliberal approach of sharing the ideas, yes, of having this global education influenced in the international enrollments. And we can see that starting from 1990s, 1998, this increasingly increased, especially in the OECD, but also in non-OECD countries. So overall, more than 5 million of people in the higher education are taking some classes or exchanges abroad. And you can see that in 2019, like the majority of the international students, they go directly to United States, United Kingdom, China, Canada, Australia, France, Russia, and so on and so forth. And you can see that at least United States, United Kingdom, Germany to some extent, and France were popular in 2011, but now we see the new players that appeared. What is interesting here, that outbound, so who is going the most? You can see this tremendous shift of the East Asia Pacific. That means that everywhere are Chinese students, everywhere students from South Korea, that indeed are one of the global players. And countries, even for example, Chinese government, they have the policies, or in Singapore, that you can get a state subsidy to study abroad, but then come back. So an interesting point, how they increased like this culture of understanding the world and trying to study different issues in different societies. Yeah. So they're the major players in this international education. And what is here important, that it's not only people, you see, it's also the issues of the soft power, yes, but also economy, because usually universities are putting higher higher fees for international students. So this is one of the way how state can, or private institutions, that how they can earn money, and it's very natural. So that's mean that these countries are very powerful in that sense of earning, and then also gaining this power. So in 2019, according to this International Education Institution, Project Atlas, United States were leaders. That they have almost 1 million of students from the other countries, and the majority of them were students from Asia. You can see, yeah, that Canada, China, Australia. So China becoming increasingly popular here because of the state subsidies the Chinese government is paying for students to study there. Yeah. But if you see for example, the quantity of students at the part of the societies, so you can see that in Australia and Canada and United Kingdom, more than 20% of the students' population are actually international population. So this globalization trends are playing a great role within these countries. And despite China is a popular place, you can see that they have too many people. It's only 1% of the students' population from other countries that penetrate. And the same story with the United States. Despite there is a top place for coming, nevertheless, only 5% are there. And in Poland, you can see also 5%, that the majority of them are Ukrainians. Is it because there is a good education, because of the good universities? Yes and no, because if you compare with the top list of the universities in 500, according to Shanghai ratings, you can actually see that not all of these countries they have the dominance of students. Definitely they are at the top list, but there is no clear correlation between the overall quality of these concrete universities and number of students that are coming. So to a major extent, it's also a political issue of making the soft power out of the education. And here you can see how globally this system working. So the United States, the majority of students are, as I told, from China, from India. There's also South Korea, Saudi Arabia, but also Canada. Yeah, present here. While, for example, in China, the same South Korea, Thailand, Pakistan, India, United States are also present here. So Chinese students, if you see by the number of the countries, yes, but the Chinese students are one of the dominant groups that are present. However, in the European scale, there is more inter-European relations. So you definitely China is present, but you can see mostly students from the European states that are moving to each other. The same story, for example, if we take the Latin America. And for Russia, they simply gathering the post-Soviet states that are present here. But here, once more, China is a very global and powerful player in terms of the international education by sending their students, but also receiving a little bit less. But this idea of studying the peculiarities of the different societies is still present for them. So what we do a follow-up about the global education at all. So right now we do consider it as a social good, the basic right, and once more the cornerstone, how the country can develop itself. It is very natural, and all the data that we have is just proving the simple words. We usually measure education by literacy and the years of education that is spent. And overall, we can say right now that the world is moving towards the global literacy because only 16% in 2016 were illiterate. Nevertheless, we see a number of countries in Southeast Asia and in Sub-Saharan Africa that still witness these challenges. And the majority of these challenges of the inequality, gender inequality, age inequality, quality of education, access to education, and the issues of multiculturalism and nationalism are very dominant in these countries. And taking into the account economic development and also the regime factor of more democratic or more authoritarian regimes, once more, we can see that these countries have lower presentees in the levels of the education. They have lower presentees in the top list of the educational performance. They have worse results in the economic development. So this is all things are interconnected, at least interconnected. Better education leads to higher individual income, but it's also a very necessary precondition for overall economic growth of the country. And one piece of score level, you remember, costs approximately 2% of the GDP, at least in the OECD countries. So the better results you have in your studies, the better in the future the GDP growth we can have. And finally, the concept of global education. Yes, that this was formulated to focus mostly on the problems that arise in the global level, in the global sphere, and touch everybody from us. And this helps for us to actually to unite our efforts to work with that. That is why global education becoming more and more popular, not the national based. However, this is indeed present, so nothing bad with that. But also the production of some common efforts to meet the global challenges, and the culture of the international mobility, virtual or not virtual, is still growing. So, and it becoming more and more popular, and more programs still exist for youngers, especially for the university students, to be a part of this global educational process. So yeah, so let me finish with that. Thank you for your attention. And I just want to bring one question that I want to discuss. It's about the how we can actually fix this situation with the developing countries and the low level of education. So if country development depends on education, can we just invest in schools in the developing countries? And if yes, so how can we do it? What should we do? And is it an interference into domestic affairs or not? And what exactly policies we can do regarding this scale? Let's take the case of Ghana and work with in the next class. And thank you. There is a literature, a lot of literature, but very interesting researches that I want you to study. Thank you and see you soon.